Hello, everybody. Privacy jokes. They tend to be funny and snarky, but they do reflect an important tussle going on in our society. Things that we have grown accustomed to, whether it's Santa Claus finding out if a kid is being nice or naughty, or a tech giant peeking into your activities to sell you a relevant ad. But the world looks a very different place when you put on your privacy glasses. So, our work, the 7 GDPR sins, is an attempt in that direction. We look at how the design and operation of modern data processing systems have evolved over the years and how they conflict with the recently proposed privacy regulation called the GDPR. This is joint work with Melissa, who is a law professor, and Vijay, who is a systems faculty, and we're all at Texas. Okay, first things first. What is GDPR? Stands for the General Data Protection Regulation. It's a law passed by the European Union and it became effective on the 25th of May 2018. At its core, it states that the protection and privacy of personal data is a fundamental right of all European people. So, what constitutes personal data? Right? So, unlike the previous privacy laws like FERPA and HIPAA, GDPR states that any information that relates to a natural person is considered personal data. So, it's a broad definition. It not only includes the data that's unique to you, like your phone number, SSN, etc., but also covers data that are not unique to you, like your browsing history, the zip code, etc. So to put its money where its mouth is, GDPR regulates the entire life cycle of the personal data, from the point of collection to processing to protection to transfer and deletion, and it does so with 99 articles that make up the law. So I'm not going to talk about these articles in detail here. You're most welcome to attend another talk I'm giving in hot storage later in the next session or at the poster session. But it suffices to say that GDPR levies hefty fines for violators. 20 million euros or up to 4% of your global revenue, whichever is higher. Okay, to make it more concrete, let's see how the personal data flows in the real world and what GDPR does to it. Okay, so what I've shown is a data subject, which is what a user is called in the GDPR parlance. Let's say a Spotify user, and a data controller, which is Spotify in this case. So the user provides personal data to controller, like the usage, the song list, etc. The controller then stores and processes this personal information. They could send it to a processor, which is a cloud provider in this case, to external processing. The controller could share it with other controllers, let's say SoundCloud. So this is how the personal data flows in the real world with a real service. Now I'm going to indicate what GDPR does with a different color here. So it has given users certain exercisable rights. So the users can exercise those rights by talking to the controller with whom the personal data, who has collected the personal data. And when there are problems in exercising those rights, they go to an entity called the supervisory authority set up under GDPR. The supervisory authority in turn can talk to the controllers to audit and investigate. And when the data controller in Spotify in this case has any problems, they have to notify the supervisory authorities. The cloud providers or the processors are also covered under GDPR. And in terms of sharing with other people, obviously they can be done only when the user has allowed data sharing permissions. Okay? So this is how the setup is. So the personal data used to flow in a certain way, and then it's now being regulated. Okay, so it's supposed to work, but what about the reality, right? So it's been 1 year since GDPR became effective. In that period, we have seen several responses from the controllers. Okay. At one extreme, a number of services like cloud, Instapaper, and online advertising exchanges, they have terminated their services to avoid having to comply with the GDPR. A few others have adapted. So USA Today does not serve ads, and the New York Times in Europe does stop serving personalized ads. So the big tech heavily advertised compliance, and the rest of the world just assumed compliance. So let me share a couple of numbers that crisply represent how things have been going on. Okay. So Gartner estimates that By the end of 2018, less than 50% of the companies that were supposed to be compliant with GDPR are not compliant. And the EU Data Protection Board reports that they received a staggering 94,000 complaints from users in just the first 9 months of GDPR. So it's fair to say that people are awakened and the companies are concerned. How did we get here? So let's take a step back and look at the internet era companies. They've primarily focused on reliability, scalability, and affordability. And they've done exceptionally well in all these metrics. So think of Google, for example, right? They operate 8 global scale services, each with a billion plus users, while maintaining 3 or 4 nines of availability, right? Not to mention they're all free. However, in this quest for reliability, scalability, and affordability, the security and privacy of personal data has taken a backseat. So what we observe is that this has given rise to operating principles and practices that are at odds with GDPR. Okay, so we call these the 7 sins. It's probably already clear, but I want to emphasize it again. What we are going to see in the next 7 slides, they're not one-off bad decisions, but instead a standard mode of operation resulting from optimizing for one set of metrics while ignoring the other. Okay, storing data forever. This kind of makes sense, right? Personal data has value and storing is cheaper. So why not just store it forever, right? So think of search engines before the right to be forgotten was instituted. Once a search engine crawls your data and puts it on the web, it just stays there forever. However, GDPR says the users have a right to be forgotten, where they can go to the controller and then say, delete my data, and it needs to be honored. Even from the controller side, there is a storage limitation. Article 5 says that when the controller collects your personal data, the controller is supposed to provide you with the time up to which they're going to store. Right? So in the post GDPR world, you go to Google Cloud and then say delete my data. They say that within 180 days, your data is guaranteed to be deleted from all across the Google infrastructure. Not the greatest number, but still a guarantee. Okay, number 2, reusing data indiscriminately. Okay, this stems from the notion that data is fungible and it could be used across for multiple things. So as recently as last year, consider this Facebook example where they collected your phone number for two-factor authentication and turned around and started using it for serving ads, right? So GDPR is quite clear on this. It's called the Article 5 purpose limitation says that when a personal data is collected, it has to be collected for a specific purpose or a set of specific purposes, and it cannot be violated. Additionally, Article 21, which is right to object, says that the user has a right to object to his or her data for being used for any specific purposes, including advertising, research, profiling, etc. So, in the post GDPR world, this January, Google was fined for exactly purpose bundling in their Android phone. Okay, number 3, creating black markets and walled gardens. So these are two different things. So personal data has value. So when a company collects it, it could either try to go and sell it in black markets, or it's so valuable that it just hoards onto it for its own self. Okay. So here's an example number from 2014 FTC study, which studied the data brokers in the US. So one of the data brokers they studied had 700 billion personal data items accrued, with an ability to provide 3,000 plus unique data points on every US consumer, right? Staggering numbers. Okay, so GDPR via Article 14, it says that when a controller collects information, say in a black market, not directly from the consumer but somewhere else, they're obligated to go to the consumer and then say that I have this information and I'm going to use it for these purposes and I will store it for these many days. Right? The users, on the other hand, have this data right called the right to data portability, where they can ask the controller to provide their information directly back to them, whatever they've collected, or provide it to another third party. Okay, so there are two examples here. One for the black market, when GDPR went into effect, these online the ad exchanges, which had amassed a considerable amount of data without trace of how they were collected and could not be used in a legit way, they shut down. And most of the services for uh, have started offering a download of the personal data that they've collected. Google Takeout is an example, but many of the services that are out there do that now. Okay, number 4, risk agnostic data processing, colloquially known as move fast and break things. We know why it exists, right? So an example of that would be, a bad example of that would be the Strava, which is a fitness app that released a global heat map of their users in order to motivate more activity. But within months of releasing that, people were able to locate undisclosed military locations and hidden secret missions, which were not supposed to be public and which instead turned out to be dangerous to soldiers and spies, right? So GDPR has two articles in this regard, Articles 35 and 36, which states that if you are a controller processing large amounts of personal data, then you need to do a risk assessment before rolling out new features, right? And if the risks are systemic in nature, for example, you're a cloud platform and it could affect a lot of other companies which are processing personal data, then you need to do a prior consultation with the supervisory authority. Okay, so how did things change post GDPR? Well, Facebook introduced a new feature called View As to increase the privacy awareness amongst the users. Unfortunately, within weeks of releasing that, it was hacked and 50 million user accounts were exposed. So there is some way to go. Next one. Number 5, hiding data breaches. So this is also obvious, right? When there's a problem or a data breach in your organization, the typical response has been to just mask it and not let anybody know that, right? So GDPR via Articles 33 and 34 says that the moment you discover there is a data breach in your organization, within 72 hours of it, the controller has to inform the supervisory authority and the users affected by it within 72 hours. Okay, so let me give you some number from the data breaches in the real world. Okay, so there are two numbers. The first is, so this is the reported data breaches in for a period of 6 months before GDPR and 6 months after GDPR. Okay, so before GDPR, there were 945 reported data breaches in the world. Once GDPR goes into effect, here's the number, 41,000, and that too only in Europe. So clearly it's working. Number 6, making unexplainable decisions. So this concerns algorithmic decision making powered by AI and ML systems. So while these are efficient and scalable, they have several problems. For example, consider the compass system, which is used by the courts to determine the risk of somebody released from jail committing crime outside in the world and then coming back to the jail, right? So researchers have shown that this is not only a black box, it has several forms of bias and it's not even accurate. So GDPR says that users have the right not to be subjected to solely automated decision making. And even when they're subjected, via Article 15, it says that they can request for information about what is the logic involved, what sort of data is used to make the decision. Okay, so it's a nascent field. So the two primary premier communities of ML and AI have recently started workshops to understand how to design explainable AI. Okay, so we got a long way to go in this. The last one is treating security as a secondary goal. Okay, this kind of stems from the underlying platform, the internet, which also treats security as a secondary goal. So that kind of permeates from the platform onto the systems that are built on top of it. However, GDPR is really strong on this. Article 25 says that systems have to be designed with data protection by design and default. And Article 24 says that if you as a controller collect any personal data, it becomes your responsibility to protect and to secure it. So how are we doing in the real world? Not very well, as you guessed. For example, consider the latest offering from Amazon called Amazon Macy, right? So we don't know how to do security well. And then there's this ML, which we really do not understand that well either. So they just combine the two and then just put it out there, see what happens. So our approach has, I think it just needs more evolution, and we need to take it more seriously. So in conclusion, I shared 7 principles and practices um, of the modern systems that are at odds with the GDPR regulations. Okay, so I want to leave with 3 parting thoughts. So while this looked at a high level of the privacy and security of personal data, um, we have an ongoing effort where we look at one individual component, the storage, and to see how we design a GDPR compliant storage system. This is a hot storage talk I have. So we, the cloud people, have been successful in solving the problems of scalability, reliability, and affordability at the cloud level, right, by the aggregation. So this kind of gives an opportunity for us to treat the privacy and protection of personal data as a first-class metric and try to solve it at the aggregate level. The last thought is that of GDPR is, while it is the first one, it's not there are many more privacy regulations coming our way. One example is the California's CCPA, which goes into effect January 1st, 2020. So it gives us opportunity as for us systems people to fix a lot of the problems that have come up. Okay, so if you have any thoughts on GDPR, definitely love to hear from you. This is a link to our lab page.